Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good, actually. Very good. Thank you. And I thought we were going to have gremlins there this morning, but never mind. They're not here this morning, which is just as well. So, have you had a good week, or do you always have a good week?
I think on the whole, try to always have a good week. Not every week has the same experience, but I suppose if you perceive it to be good, then it will be. So, yeah, it's always a good week.
Okay, good, good, good. So, what would you like to inflict? Huh?
Clicked.
Come on, Baz, for goodness sake. What would you like to impart to our wonderful listeners this morning?
So, I wanted to talk about the traditional idea of 3 meals per day and what they mean to us in this country, because probably most people in the UK and equally across sort of Western society. So I mean, America, Canada, Australia, traditionally sort of Western capitalist societies, we have a perception of the traditional breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Yeah.
And we eat certain foods based on the word that we're using. Breakfast, I mean, if I said to you, Barry, breakfast, what does that mean? What kind of foods does that involve?
To me, breakfast is a multitude of things, but the first thing that springs to mind is normally the full English, which would be something. But there again, more for me, maybe a bowl of cereal, and sometimes don't even have time for that.
Okay.
So it could be a bowl of cereal, or it could be maybe a piece of toast. But occasionally, and I can't think the last time I had one, would be a full English.
Okay, so that's a pretty common response in the UK, that people think of breakfast on a weekend as this huge, greasy pile of full English. You probably get your daily calorie in just one plate.
Yeah.
Or during the week, breakfast is quick, have no time, and it's usually some sort of boxed carbohydrate out of another box. So a piece of bread, cereal, something like that. So we have a traditional idea. And equally for lunch, most people in this country would say that lunch equates to a sandwich, packet of crisps, or a salad, packet of crisps. There is an idea of what it means. And then equally the evening meal, most people, and feel free to ring in and correct me if you're not one of these most people, but most people would think of their evening meal as larger meal, as a hot meal, as this is where I have the bulk of my food because I'm starving when I get home.
Like a main meal, would they say that was the main meal?
Yeah, exactly. So we have this idea, and this kind of idea worked relatively well when the 3 meal a day sort of approach first came about, which is actually back at sort of the Romans. That's when they really started having 3 meals a day. But you've got to think about the fact that over the last, few thousand years, most of that, there was no artificial light. So people ate based on daylight hours. So they'd get up much earlier, they'd have breakfast much earlier, they'd then put in a solid 6 hours of arduous labor. So by midday, they were pretty hungry, would have a meal, and then they'd eat quite early as well and go to bed early. So everybody's circadian rhythms was different because they didn't have the artificial light to stay up later. Most people nowadays, when I tell people I go to bed at 9 p.m., they look at me in shock horror, as if this is, unheard of. Because
Well, I wouldn't do that because I've done that many times, particularly just recently, and I also think if you've got a driving day the next day, not driving as such, but physically and mentally, you sometimes need to do that. Or if you're feeling slightly under the weather, then that also helps.
Exactly. But for most people, they would stay up till sort of 11, half 11, essentially sitting on a sofa watching TV. If we actually broke that down, that's all that people are doing. For me, I'd rather go to bed early and wake up and sort of do something productive.
Mhm.
And if you look in other countries, so countries where maybe obesity isn't an issue or health is at a much more sort of a higher standard culturally, or longevity, people live longer, these kind of cultures, you would basically look at the Orient, places like Japan, and the Mediterranean, places like Italy, Spain. And if you look at the way that they eat, there's not really any such thing as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's just meals. All of the meals are just called that. It's my morning meal, afternoon meal, evening meal. They don't have words which trigger certain associations.
But it's
And
just meals at times. They don't actually give them titles then.
no, and the reason being is if you look at these different meals, they can contain all sorts of things that we in this country would generally not associate. So in the Med, breakfast might be some fresh chicken, some tomatoes, drizzle of olive oil, a little bit of fresh basil, crack of sea salt, right? To most people, that sounds like a lunch salad, but in the Med, that would be breakfast. In Japan, they'll have sushi for breakfast. They'll have, smoked fish for breakfast. They'll have rice for breakfast. And the best way to eat for health, for energy, for weight loss, for whatever the goal is to actually shift that big main meal in the evening and move it forward. So you want to have larger amounts of food, sort of breakfast and lunch, your first two meals, lesser amount of food in the evening. Equally, most people start their day with some sort of processed carb, toast or cereal being the two obvious ones. That just creates a sugar spike. When you have a sugar spike, your blood sugar goes up. Ultimately, what goes up must come down.
Yep.
And then mid-morning, we're in this sort of sugar crash. And most people go, oh, I need something, I'm craving something. And they grab a coffee and a biscuit, or a coffee and a packet of crisps. And again, they have a sort of hit of refined carbs. Blood sugar goes up. It drops, they get to lunch, they're starving hungry, they have a big old wedge of bread in a sandwich and more crisps, and they end up on this sort of sugar roller coaster where they keep having crashes. And guarantee a lot of people listening will have a crash somewhere around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. They'll feel really tired, and it's because they started their day with this processed refined carb. And actually what you would do in the Med or the Orient is start your day with protein, fresh fish, fresh chicken, fresh meats, eggs, whatever it might be. And that keeps you in a really stable blood sugar level. So it's fantastic for keeping you full. It's fantastic for avoiding snacking. It's fantastic for energy levels. So we need to just start to shift in this country. If we genuinely want to have a day where we're not craving, where our energy is high, we need to shift what we associate with different meal time. So, my breakfast will usually be some sort of chicken or fish with fresh or grilled vegetables and a bit of olive oil. That will be breakfast, and that will keep me going all the way till lunch. Lunch is then a larger meal, and then that lighter kind of salady kind of meal, that would be the evening. So it's about sort of shifting the perception of what breakfast, lunch, dinner mean.
Is it a kind of thing whereby we may well have been I don't know, sort of steered in this way that this is what breakfast is, this is what lunch is, and it's been brought down from a long time. And do you think that we as humans have difficulty in making change because that change is not what we're used to? But what we're used to, as you'll try and point out, is not what's better for us.
So what we're used to is just another way of saying it's a habit. People have a habit of having cereal or toast for breakfast. People are in a habit of having a large cooked meal in the evening and a lighter sandwich or something in the afternoon. Even meal times, lunch being at 12 or 1, that's a habit. And these habits were pretty much brought about when we started working the hours that we work. And it mainly happened when we started revolutionizing women's roles in society. So you got to think about sort of 70, 80 years ago, most women were at home making fully cooked meals 3 times a day because they had that time. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I love working, so I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but there was someone usually at home who had the time frame to do that. As soon as there was a revolution in women's roles and women started to take on larger roles, they were working just as much as men. And there wasn't that, I suppose you could call, traditional split between the male and the female. time became an issue for most families. And now time is a massive issue for most families, especially if you're working like 2-3 jobs and you've got school runs and all sorts. So everything became about convenience. And that's where the cereal companies came in. That's where the Warburtons, the Kellogg's, everybody managed to take advantage, because it isn't that we prefer a sugar crusted piece of processed carb soaked in milk. It's not that we prefer it, it's just that it's an awful lot quicker than preparing something like fresh chicken and fresh vegetables in the morning. So it mainly came about because of the idea that convenience was king, and actually convenience is what I believe will cripple society. We have this absolute need now for as much speed and convenience as possible. You know, people will say, oh, I need something tomorrow for my kid at school. I'll go on Amazon, it will arrive. Well, imagine if we didn't have next day delivery. You know, people are crippled now by their reliance on processes to create convenience for them. We've lost the art of actually caring for ourselves in a way that takes a little bit of effort. And I'm all about making things easy, right? You know, if you can buy some pre-cooked chicken breast and have it just sitting there in the fridge, why not? But the reason it came about, and the reason that we're in a habit, is companies study behavior. All of the big companies that dominate the world, Nestle, Facebook, Amazon, Meta, or whatever it is, all of these companies have boards of psychologists and behavior analysts who study how we work and take advantage of that, and know that we get instant hits from convenient and quick. And so they've designed products, i.e. cereal, i.e. pre-packaged sandwiches, i.e. ready meals in the evening, i.e. takeaways, to take advantage of how our human behavior works. And we're very happy and quick as a society to fall into that trap. I mean, you look at Domino's, the takeaway company, the pizza company, was awful when it first started. Nobody really bought into it. And then the owner of Domino's, when it was just a small little on its own before it became a huge chain, said, okay, well, how can I make people want our pizza over anybody else? And he brought in if we don't deliver in 30 minutes or less, you get your pizza for free. As soon as he did that, the convenience aspect, Domino's took off and pretty much took over the world of takeaway pizza. So we are crippled by our desire for somebody else to do it for us now, rather than exploring our own ability to do it and just put a little bit more time into it.
Okay, so in essence, then the bigger companies and the people that basically we're being controlled in a way with maybe unwittingly in some circumstances, not all perhaps. So unwittingly, what we do, we buy into that and actually fund the people that are controlling us, because that's. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's the way that makes business, but it doesn't make it right, does it?
So I'm not on my moral high ground here, or high horse, or there's moral this or moral that. It's more about just an awareness. We need to be aware that we, on average in this country, will see over 130 different images a day of foods that companies are trying to push down our throat, whether that's McDonald's, Burger King, different takeaways, whether it's quick meals, whether it's it's snack deals at lunch from the co-op and sandwiches and things like that. We're always seeing constant advertisements, and these are businesses who are using our bodies to make money and using our behavioral psychology as human beings to make money. Now, whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. Some people might just say that's business. It's more about being aware that it's happening, because I would always use the golf course analogy. So if you're playing golf and you hit the ball and it goes in one direction. Now, if you just hit that ball at a slight 4-degree difference, that's it, 4 degrees, tiny, tiny little angle to the bare eye, you wouldn't even see it. But as you hit it, by the time it got to the end of the golf course, it's going to be so far away from the first golf ball that you can't even see them. They've ended up in two completely different places. And that's what advertising does. You're on one direction in your health, your journey, your body, and you'll see one advert that will say, hey, come in for a Big Mac because you deserve it. And it will just nudge you 4 degrees, not even noticeable. And if you continue on that path because you've allowed this company to nudge you that way, you'll end up in such a different place, you've not even realized how you got there. So it's about that awareness of what's happening and just saying, right, well, if I'm choosing, is it my choice or is it because somebody's influenced me to do it?
Well, you say influence. I mean, even if you go to the stage of people's clothing and fashion stuff and all the rest of it, the amount of people that are on YouTube and other social media saying, well, you should buy these shoes or you should buy this, but it happens in all sorts of advertising with certain cars, certain things we need for our house. You need this. They're telling us what you need. Mr. P in Stevenage says, is it because society expects us to be available and working and doing rather than looking after ourselves? And also, can't do breakfast because I'm expected at work. Are these expectations of other people, or is it the fact that we don't allow ourselves the time in order to encompass all of that?
Both. So there is a lack of boundaries now in today's society where it's you're kind of expected to be on call 24/7. If you have downtime, it's sort of almost, I used to be in a job where if you were sick, you had like a cold or anything like that, the idea of calling in sick, you'd be considered weak, right? So there are expectations that boundaries no longer exist when it comes to personal work. So I agree with that. I think there are also choices. So I would disagree and say that anybody, doesn't matter if you're expected at work, could choose to eat breakfast if they decided to. There will be sometimes I will travel for a day to go and visit a client, and I'm leaving the house at, I don't know, 5:30 in the morning. I'll still eat breakfast at 5. I'll just get up earlier. I'll just go to bed earlier. There's always a choice because that's how naturally we used to be. We talked at the beginning about the daylight hours. At the moment, it's light at 4:30. That's when people would get up and have breakfast traditionally. So we want to always understand that it's still a choice. And if you have to go into work early, there's always a way around it. Breakfast is a really important meal because it keeps you in a really good energetic state. And most people that struggle with weight gain isn't because they are eating too much. It's usually because during the day they're eating too little. And then they get to the evening and they gorge on huge portions, end up finishing it with a lot of sugar and snacking. But that's why breakfast is super important. There's always a choice.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to go and catch the chicken and see if I can get that prepared on the griddle or something of that nature. Yes, well, breakfast, made me think, as occasionally for me, breakfast, poached egg on toast, something like that, maybe, but, which is not so bad. But I take on board what you say. And Mr. P, that told you. And I and I think it's time for us to go. I've got a food record lined up, and I thought that would just sort of fit in nicely. Listen, Rita, thank you very much. For more advice and information, how do people get hold of your good self?
So you can head to my website, which is thehealthandfitnesscoach.com. You can email us, Rita, RITA, at thehealthandfitnesscoach.co.uk, or you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Rita, thank you very much. We'll catch you next week. Have a good day.